Everyone, I really am delighted to be talking to you today about strategies to trace your ancestors in Scotland. We're extremely lucky here in Scotland. We do have a lot of wonderful resources which are now available online to anyone in the world. And I'd also like to talk to you this evening about some other resources you might want to explore should you be planning to visit the area. Just like Jeff was saying, he's coming over to Scotland next month, and we know lots of people from the States, Canada, New Zealand and Australia are very keen to come back and actually visit the areas where their ancestors lived. But before we get started, I just want to talk to you briefly about where Scotland fits in to the UK or the British Isles, because sometimes it's a bit of a mix for people not from the area to know the difference. The map you're looking at just now is the map really of the British Isles. The British Isles encompasses Scotland, England, Wales and Ireland. Great Britain is the blue bit here on the map, which is Scotland, England and Wales. And the United Kingdom is made up of Scotland, England and Wales, and this bit of Ireland, Northern Ireland. So Scotland is a completely separate jurisdiction in lots of ways. I've got up on the screen now a map of Scotland's administrative areas back in 1947. Scotland has its own legal system, separate from the English legal system, its own education system, and since we have now a devolved government in Scotland for about 12 years, we have responsibilities across many other areas in Scotland. Some of you may be aware that the current Scottish Government is proposing a referendum to take place in this country in the next couple of years with regard to the possibility of Scotland becoming independent again from the rest of the UK. So interesting times ahead. The Scottish administration areas which you can see here, which many of your ancestors will have been coming from, are the counties of Scotland, which have changed quite considerably over the centuries. And currently there are no counties in Scotland. Instead we have 32 local authorities. However, our resources for you to look for your ancestors do take account of the changes in the administration areas in the country, and if you look at one area of Scotland and your ancestors came from an area that either slightly changed its borders or perhaps amalgamated with another, you should still be able to find them based on the information that you know. So, where do we get started here? Here are the counties, boroughs and parishes. Those are the main areas that you would look up when you're going to search for your ancestors, whether it's in census records or whether it's in births, marriages or deaths, or any of the other areas that we can look at online for Scotland. Scottish statutory records began in 1855, sometime after England. In fact, in England statutory record keeping began in 1837. In Ireland it was later than Scotland, although there were records of non-Catholic marriages in Ireland in 1845. However, Scotland is a country well known for its administration and its record keeping, and in fact pre-1855 there were quite a number of records kept by the churches in Scotland. So where are you going to start to look for your family? Well, one of the poll questions that you had was asking you if you had looked at a site known as Scotland's People. Now that's a screenshot of Scotland's People, but we're actually going to go out and look at this site live. Scotland's People is funded by the Scottish Government. It's a site which provides access all in one place to a huge number of records of Scotland's people over the centuries. And this is the front page you can see here of Scotland's People. It is a pay-per-use site. and Scottish people don't get it free either. You can see there along the top the number of credits I currently have. It's based on a credit system. Unfortunately, it's not a subscription system like perhaps Ancestry has, or Find My Past if you've used that. But it does have a huge number of resources growing all the time. You can see down the left-hand side, these are the main areas of records which are available to you on Scotland's people. So the statutory registers are those which have taken place from 1855 of births, marriages and deaths. There are also Old Parish Registers, which I'll explain a bit later, and those are of births and baptisms and marriages, bans of marriage, which were notifications of marriages to take place, and some death and burial deaths and burial records. There are also records from the Catholic Church, which have been collated by the Catholic Archives in Scotland, covering many of these same areas, together with some other records specific to the Catholic Church, again, which I'll be able to show you. And there are also census records. Now, I know there's been great excitement in the US over the last couple of weeks because of the release of the 1940 US Census. Well, in Scotland, it would be wonderful if we could access records as late as that. But I'm afraid in Scotland there's 100 years, a cut-off date before any of the census records can be made available. And so we've actually only recently had access to the most latest, or the latest census for us, which is 1911. Censuses were taken every 10 years, and the ones which still exist are currently from 1841 up to 1911, and they're all available on this site. Valuation rolls I'll come and talk to you about in a few minutes as well. And you can also hear we've got some records of wills and testaments together with coats of arms. So really a one-stop shop. Some of these records are available in other sites, but as far as images of births, marriage, deaths and census records and these Catholic archives, they are not available on any other site. You can access census records on Ancestry and Find My Past. You can access births, baptisms from the Old Parish Registers, marriages, etc. on familysearch.org. But with regard to accessing the actual images online, this is the only place where you can see that. Births are currently available for, because of privacy reasons, there are some records which you cannot look at online, and perhaps I can demonstrate that by clicking on births to let you see how you can search. And here comes the search options for us. And if I type, for example, well, let's look at one of the names that you mentioned, Jeff Hill, I think his name was Alexander. Let's see how many Alexander Hills were born in Scotland over that period, 1855 to 2009. We'll not restrict it to particular counties or to districts, and I'll just click do the search to let you see what happens. Well, yeah, as you can see, what I would have expected here, Hill is a very common name in Scotland. There are 579 Alexanders based around that time. But let's narrow this down a bit and let's search between 1910 and 1920. We've now got 52 matches, and I'll explain how the credit system works. For every page that you want to look at, it costs you 1 credit. So let's have 1 credit's worth of a look at births for Alexander Hills. Now, as I look down here, you'll see that there are a number of images that are coming up that say view, 5 credits, and then there are others which say no image. That doesn't mean they don't exist. What it does mean is that because of privacy reasons, the ability to view the actual images of a birth record on Scotland's people only allow you to look up to 100 years ago. So currently, we can only look at images online up to 1911. There are similar restrictions on marriages, and on marriages it's within the last 75 years that you can't look at the images, and for deaths it's within 50 years. However, should you wish to look at any one of those records which have got view 5 credits against them, we'll just look at one to let you see. I click on view and it's going to let me look there and then at this particular birth record. So I'll click it up. And here you can see a typical record which you would see for births. There are actually 3 records because this is a copy of the registrar's page which was deposited in the General Register Office, and so there are information here about 3 separate births. One of an Alexander Hill, the one we were looking at. It tells us where and when he was born, and I've got another example to let you see of that in a minute. It tells us his parents' names, his father's occupation, his mother's maiden surname, and very interestingly it also tells us the date and place of their marriage. The next column tells us who presented this information to the registrar, and the last column records the date at which this record was placed in the register. So that's an example of a birth. Let's just close that down just now. Similarly, for marriages, you can do quite comprehensive searches with male surname, female surname, forenames, etc. We can restrict, as we did there with the years, we can also restrict it to the county of birth or marriage that you think it took place, and then you can restrict that also to the districts in which the marriage occurred. You can choose up to 5 of those. However, it's a very interesting search function on this site in that there are no required fields. So you don't have to know the surname in order to progress with a search. If you have someone, for example, who is a very distinctive forename and you know an area in which they lived, then you could undertake a search without actually putting in a surname. The other thing to note on Scotland's People is that there is huge flexibility on what you can do with regard to making your search more accurate or filtering out areas. For example, when it comes to the surname field, you can see there are all of these phonetic options and surname variants and soundex. And if you don't know what any of those are, then there are lots of helps around the site which you can access simply by clicking on the question mark, and down on the right hand side here you'll see there's an explanation of all of those options. So you really can tailor the search to suit whatever it is you want to undertake. With regard to deaths, there's a very similar option. There's an additional extra feature in the fact that Scotland indexed female deaths under both their married surname and their maiden surname. So it's a very good help if you do have someone who has a fairly common name. If you know their married surname and their maiden surname, you can put both of those in these boxes here. And that will help to narrow down the death record for a particular female in your ancestry. The mother's maiden surname here is only indexed in the records from 1974, so it's really not a great deal of use when you're looking at the earlier records that you might have. Other things to note, and we'll come to some of these other records later, is that Scotland's People always keeps track of what you've looked at. So if you want to look at previous searches, it's got every search you've ever undertaken here, always available, and you can print that out, you can export it as a spreadsheet file. So if you're sometimes not very good at recording in your research log which searches you've undertaken, then Scotland's People helps you out there by keeping track of that for you. Similarly, if you want to know which images you've looked at any time, you can go back and click on Viewed Images, and all of the images that you have looked at will be listed here. Again, you can do the same thing. You can print these out, you can download them, you can save them to an Excel spreadsheet or whatever. So you've always got good records of where you've been and what you've done. So can't recommend it highly enough, but let's have a couple of examples